Okay, let's do part 2 of fiscal policy. We're picking up, and the audio was poor, so I'm going to comment as I watch what we do. When we look back at the end of our life, if we did nothing else, but we did help a little old lady across the street one time, then we can know that it was all worth it. False. Yeah, it's that kind of rationale that justifies all sorts of wasteful government programs. This is an extremely inefficient way to spend your life. It was a total waste. Well, an almost total waste, 99.9% wasteful. Is it possible to support the tax and oppose this spending? Yes. True. All right. Move along here. Question 19. Automatic stabilizers increase the amplitude and wavelength of the business cycle. Well, that's false. It does decrease the amplitude and it increases the wavelength. If we take a look at a normal business cycle that we have been drawing, it's not like the old days where the amplitude was high and the wavelength was short. Now the recessions are further apart and not quite as severe. Public choice theory predicts elected officials respond to personal incentives rather than act in the public interest. That's true. Question number 21. Which of the following will not lead to a leftward shift in the short-run aggregate supply curve? So what we're looking for here to find out what change in the short-run aggregate supply curve is that 3 of these are going to cause leftward shifts or decreases in the short-run aggregate supply, or there'll be short-run shocks to the supply in the country, and then one of them will be beneficial. So let's see. If we see an increase in wage rates, that's going to decrease short-run aggregate supply. An increase in the price of non-labor inputs will also decrease supply. An increase in productivity, though, will shift supply to the right, and an adverse supply shock which shifts supply to the left. So the correct answer is C, the odd man out. And let's see, skip ahead slightly. We got 2 decreases in supply, increase in supply, and a decrease in supply. That's very good. Okay, now we have Exhibit 16. We're going to use Exhibit 16 to answer questions the next 4 questions here. So if the economy begins at equilibrium point E, then we're going to see either an increase in prices, a decrease in price. If we move over to B, it's a shift to the right, is a inflationary gap. Shift to the left is going to be a recessionary gap. And when we look through questions 22, if the economy begins at equilibrium point E, which of the labeled points will have the highest increase in the CPI? And that'll be whatever brings us to the highest price level, CPI. That's going to bring us up to A. There's the recessionary gap over at D, inflationary gap over at B. But here we're asking about which one is going to show the highest increase in price relative to E, the A. Refer to Exhibit 16. If the economy begins at equilibrium at point E, which of the labeled points on this graph indicate the highest increase in gross domestic product? Well, that'll be over here at point B, where we have a major increase in quantity. That's the GDP in quantity for the country. Next question, which of the points in this graph is most likely representative of the highest unemployment rate? That would be the recessionary gap over at point D. And then lastly, suppose equilibrium is at point A and conditions change and we move down to C. Well, the only way you can get from A to C is if there was a decrease in demand at the same time there was an increase in supply, or an increase in supply at the same time there was a decrease in demand. Here we have a decrease in demand. There we have an increase in demand. Increase in the price of foreign goods will cause an increase in demand. A decrease in the price of foreign goods will cause a decrease in demand. So since we're looking for a decrease in demand, we know the choice is either A or D. Only A or D will have an increase in supply, though. Business taxes increase is going to cause a decrease in supply. decrease in wages is going to be an increase in supply. So the answer is going to be D here. Good. Which of the, I think that myself is working out this question right here. Business tax increased is a decrease in supply. Decrease in wages is an increase in supply. And since we're looking for an increase in supply and a decrease in demand, that makes D the correct answer. Good question. That one's on the test in one way or another. Instead of asking about shifting from A to C, I'm suggesting a shift from D to B or C to A or whatever the case may be. Which of the following is an example of a beneficial supply shock? Well, we're looking for something good, and we have 4 things that are bad and 1 thing that's good. Nationwide drought lasting for many months, that's bad. Outbreak of war, bad. Influenza virus, bad. Plague of locusts, bad. Development of the internet, good. So that's our answer, a beneficial supply shock. When there is an inflationary gap, real GDP, oh I see, yes. Real GDP is above the natural real GDP. And the actual unemployment rate is below the natural unemployment rate. So we're looking for something that's greater than, less than. That looks like A is a good choice. Now we can finish up. I think we're moving on to the last page. Suppose the economy is self-regulating and the actual unemployment rate is more than the natural unemployment rate. Well, that means that we're in a recession. If we're in a recession and the economy is self-regulating, then we'll be out of the recession and the economy is self-regulating, self-correcting. And eventually the economy is going to produce at a level of output that is, this means that the economy is producing currently below its natural level and will eventually increase output, B. Now we get to what looks like a very complex graph down here with lots of different slashes, but it's a model of the Keynesian model. Here we have shifts in aggregate demand that continually shift to the right, and short-run aggregate supply, which adjusts to these higher prices. And so we have a movement in the economy that starts here at Q3 P5, moves up to an inflationary gap, back to long-run aggregate supply, up to the inflationary gap, back to the long-run aggregate supply. Question 29. If the economy is self-regulating and aggregate demand increases, well, when aggregate demand increases, then we have a increase in prices and output, which then is an inflationary gap, which automatically corrects. The higher prices then lead to a eventual drop in both. Right. So aggregate demand increases and we move from a point of low production and normal unemployment up to higher prices with higher than normal production. Wages and prices will rise along there. Lastly, we look at this one. We have a long-run aggregate supply curve with a point K, and we've also got a recessionary points I and L over on the left side, and inflationary gap points J and M on the other side. A and D both correspond with the long-run aggregate supply of K. When we have an institutional PPF and the long-run aggregate supply are one and the same. Therefore, it is possible to go beyond the institutional PPF up to a physical PPF that is D or F, which corresponds with J and M. If you're in a recession, you're underemploying your resources, which is G on the PPF curve. Over on the Keynesian model, it's the I and L are the same as G. So I might ask any kind of question there as far as this goes. In this particular question, 30, point D on graph 2 corresponds to either J or M on question 30. So that's E, and that's what we do. Thank you.